Hey everyone, Eric Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast and Happy New Year. It's our first newscast of 2020 and we are raring to go. We're ready to get started. Already, 2020 is off to quite a start and not in a good way. The Iranian regime and its proxies have attacked the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Huge escalation. We're going to talk about it today. Before I do that, be sure to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube. Give us a big thumbs up, like what we are doing. We've got some great things planned for you in 2020. Some additional exclusive material coming to you right here on YouTube. So tell your friends, your family members, and your neighbors. We're bringing you the kinds of cutting-edge stories and analysis that you just won't hear anywhere else, certainly not in the mainstream media, for such a time as this. And what a time we are living in. I believe 2020 has major prophetic implications. I've said it before, I'll say it today, and already we're off to a very bumpy start with the Iranian regime. We talked about this on last week's newscast. As we look back at 2019, the year in review, the big story, folks, to my mind, was the increasing boldness of the Iranian regime. Think about it. In 2019, shooting down a U.S. drone, attacking shipping in the Persian Gulf, conducting a very daring cruise missile and drone attack against Saudi oil fields, shutting down some 5% of the global oil supply. This is obviously a regime that is on the march. And guess what? Their backs are against the wall because U.S. sanctions are working. They're biting. They're making a shambles of the Iranian economy. So, of course, the regime tries to deflect attention from its internal domestic problems by lashing out against external enemies, whether it's their Arab neighbors like Saudi Arabia, whether it's the great Satan, America, their words, not mine, or the little Satan, Israel. That's the ideology. That is what they believe, and that's exactly what they're doing right now, folks. Key thing to remember, the ideology of the Iranian regime is what drives their policy, and over the last weekend of 2019, that policy against America went into overdrive. Let's review the events real quick and get you caught up in case you missed it. The last weekend of 2019, we had a missile attack, a rocket attack against an Iraqi military base in northern Iraq, which was housing U.S. contractors and U.S. soldiers. Now, this attack was conducted by a terrorist organization called Kataib Hezbollah. It's not the same as the Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, but they do have two things in common. Number one, they are radical jihadist terrorist groups. And number two, they are directed, supported, and financed by, guess who? The Iranian regime. This was an Iranian-directed attack against U.S. soldiers and U.S. contractors. And guess what? It resulted in the death of one American contractor and the injuries, serious injuries, to 4 U.S. soldiers. Again, this attack was directed by the Iranian regime. Obviously, the United States had to respond and respond forcefully. The Trump administration did just that, ordering U.S. soldiers, U.S. fighter jets, to bomb Kataib Hezbollah fighters along the Iraq-Syria border. Some 27 of those Iranian-backed terrorists who have American blood on their hands were killed in that strike, but that was not the end of it. Fast forward to the final day of 2019, we had Kataib Hezbollah, this radical Iraq-based Shia militia backed by Iran. Around 6,000 reportedly of these terrorist and militia members backed by the Iranian regime attempted to storm the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. And basically, I'm guessing, folks, that their goal was to replicate Benghazi. Thankfully, that did not happen. But over the course of 2 days, these 6,000 terrorists backed by Iran caused some pretty significant damage in the embassy compound. They apparently, and you can see the pictures online, they destroyed a reception area. They graffitied all over the walls, destroyed property, and they tried to get through the breach even further into the embassy. Thankfully, they were stopped. The embassy staff did not evacuate, and some 100 U.S. Marines, a rapid response force, were called in to support the embassy staff and repel these attackers, and they did just that. These attackers, as of January 2nd, when I'm coming to you with the newscast, these attackers, again, directed by Iran, did back off. They've backed away from the embassy. They say they have made their point. The Trump administration, thankfully, is treating this as an attack on American interest by the Iranian regime, which is exactly what it is. It's nice to see some common sense coming out of Washington, D.C. in this case. President Trump said, look, we are holding Iran, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said the same thing. We are holding the Iranian regime accountable for this attack on our embassy and the deadly rocket attack against that Iraq military base, which killed a U.S. contractor and wounded 4 U.S. soldiers. President Trump vowed this, we will not have any Benghazis on my watch, which was really refreshing to hear. And we have some 750 members of the 82nd Airborne now transiting right now from Fort Bragg to Kuwait, a rapid response force. If something flares up again, if our embassy is targeted again, they will respond. And we already have a few thousand U.S. troops in Iraq and next door in Syria. So the Iranian regime is playing with fire. And really the man behind all this, the regime is behind it, but a key player in the regime, folks, and you've heard me talk about him on previous newscasts and on our Watchman television show. I call him the most dangerous man in the Middle East. His name is Qasem Soleimani. Now, he's an Iranian Revolutionary Guards general. He answers directly to the supreme leader of Iran, and he is in charge of Iran's external terror operations, which means you see Soleimani. Hey, you see him in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria. He's been photographed in all of these countries, meeting with terrorists, Iran-backed terrorists, in those respective countries. He is the man who directs all of these attacks against Israel, against American interests. I'm sure he had his fingerprints all over that attack against the Saudi oil fields back in September, which we've talked about here. Qasem Soleimani is the most dangerous man in the Middle East. I do not say that lightly. And folks, it was no surprise and no coincidence that these protesters, as the mainstream media referred to them, these Iranian-backed militias and terrorists who attempted to storm the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, it was no coincidence that they were vocally expressing their support and their allegiance to Qasem Soleimani. Surprise, surprise. Again, you know, when I was in northern Iraq filming in September 2019, spent some great time in Iraqi Kurdistan, a true friend of the United States. I spoke to Kurdish officials and leaders in the Kurdish Peshmerga. One of them told me, look, Qasem Soleimani is effectively the prime minister of Iraq. And that's a big problem. That's the kind of influence he wields. And they have these militias under the umbrella, under the control of Iran, these Shia militias in Iraq called the Popular Mobilization Units, PMU for short. These are Shia militias controlled by the Iranian regime, which means they're controlled by the regime's point man in Iraq, Qasem Soleimani. Kataib Hezbollah, which carried out this attack, they are part of these Popular Mobilization Units, the PMU, which the Iranian regime is using to advance its interests in Iraq. Now, U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper said, look, this may only be the beginning. The game has changed, in his words. Clearly, the Iranian regime is emboldened. Clearly, again, because their backs are against the wall, sanctions are biting. They are lashing out externally. And it's going to continue, according to the Defense Secretary. U.S. forces are on high alert in Iraq and elsewhere around the Middle East. Who knows what Iran will do next? They don't seem to be backing down. If they back down, that looks even worse for them domestically, right? They're having these economic woes. And then when they take a punch on the chin in the foreign policy realm, they're really teetering. So expect, sadly, folks, expect more of this. We're in the early days of 2020. And we predicted this here on the newscast. It really wasn't that hard to see. This fits the Iranian regime's MO since 1979 when, ironically enough, they stormed a U.S. embassy in Tehran and seized that embassy. Thankfully, we did not have a repeat of that in 2019. But this is the ideology, the revolutionary global ideology of this regime. And if you do not understand this ideology, you cannot defeat it. I feel that we have a national security team now in the U.S. that gets it. I can tell you that the Israelis certainly get it. They know what the Iranian regime is all about. And as 2020 dawns, folks, we continue that collision course, right, that we've talked about, Israel and Iran. I don't think Iran wants to get into a shooting war with the United States, but they want to push the envelope for sure and make things very precarious and very miserable for the U.S. in the Middle East. Israel, on the other hand, Iran is very clear that they are upping the ante there, so to speak, and empowering Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, other Shia militias in the Golan Heights. That could be the beginning of that great northern war that is coming, that we've talked about here on the newscast. Whew, a lot going on as we get started here with 2020. Fasten your seatbelts, folks. Here's the good news. God Almighty still sits on the throne. The God of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. As all of this unfolds, keep the United States in prayer, keep America in prayer, keep the people of Iran in prayer. Look, some 1,500 Iranians were slaughtered by this regime just last month as they were protesting. So we have a lot of moving parts. The chess pieces are moving on the board in the Middle East, and what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East, as we've learned. So keep an eye on all of this in 2020. We will be back with you next week again here on the newscast. Hey, some good news as 2020 dawns. Christians United for Israel has passed the 8 million member mark. Wow, pretty amazing. So if you haven't joined this incredible movement that we're a part of here at the Watchman, join Christians United for Israel. Visit cufi.org. Another good piece of news. As 2020 dawned, we passed the 50,000 mark here for subscribers on our Watchman YouTube channel, and we believe this is only the beginning. So a big thank you to everyone who's watched and subscribed. Also, be sure to check out the Watchman television show. Remember, if you love the newscast, you'll love our 30-minute show. We are on location in Israel and other parts of the Middle East and around the world every week. That's Friday night, 10:30 p.m. Eastern on TBN. Sundays, 12:30 a.m. Eastern on Fox Business. That's a mouthful, but good things are happening, remember. So until next time, from the Watchman Newscast team, God bless you, and remember, never hold your peace. See you soon.